Szeretettel köszöntöm kedves vendégeinket, az Alapjogokért Központ a Szabadság utolsó európai fellegvára, Magyarország egy amerikai külügyi szakértő szemével című rendezvényén. Külön tisztelettel köszöntöm meghívott előadónkat, Shea Bradley Farrellt és Chris Farrellt. Én Szikra Levente vagyok, az Alapjogokért Központ elemzője. Felhívom figyelmüket, hogy az esemény második felében tartandó beszélgetés nyelve angol lesz, melynek ideje alatt szinkrontolmácsolást biztosítunk. Elsőként felkérem Szántó Miklóst, az Alapjogokért Központ főigazgatóját, hogy tartsa meg megnyitó beszédét.
Én is sok szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit itt az Alapjogokért Központ irodaházában. Külön köszöntöm Shea Bradley Farrellt és Chris Farrellt természetesen. Ahogy önök is talán észrevették, az elmúlt években az Alapjogokért Központ nemzetközi építkezés, nemzetközi aktivitás területén turbófokozatba kapcsolt. Nem csak Európában, hanem transatlanti viszonyrendszerben, Amerikában is. Ennek jele, hogy partnerségre léptünk az Amerikai Konzervatív Unióval, Magyarországra hoztuk tavaly a CPEC-et is, idén is, májusban meg fogjuk rendezni a CPEC Hungaryt, de most új szintet lépünk, egy új dimenziót nyitunk meg az Alapjogokért Központnál, ugyanis dr. Shea lesz az Alapjogokért Központ első külföldi vezető vendégkutatója. És nem csupán vendégkutató lesz nálunk dr. Shea, hanem és azon kívül, hogy hozzá fog járulni az Alapjogokért Központnál végzett tudományos munkához, a közös nagy projektünk az, hogy egy könyvet fog írni a külföldi hallgatóság, főleg amerikai közönség számára Magyarországról, a magyar politikai viszonyokról. Azért tartom nagyon fontosnak, hogy egy olyan kutató, oktató, aki nem különben az egyik legnevesebb amerikai intézet, a Counterpoint Institute-nak az elnöke is, és elég komoly külügyi szakértői háttérrel és nemzetközi tapasztalattal rendelkezik, csatlakozik az Alapjogokért Központ stábjához, Amerikából, mert hogy az Amerikai Egyesült Államok az nem csak Joe Biden, az nem csak David Pressman, és az nem csak a demokrata párt. Amerikában is vannak Magyarországnak barátai, Amerikában is vannak nagyon sok józan, konzervatív hang, akik egyetértenek velünk, magyar konzervatívokkal a béke és biztonság ügyében, egyetértenek velünk abban, hogy háború helyett békére van szükség, hogy blokkosodás helyett összekapcsoltságra, connectivity-re van szükség, és hogy egy új hidegháború helyett együttműködésre van szükség a világban. Vannak olyan barátaink, dr. Shea is ilyen, akik velünk együtt osztják az Isten haza család hármas egységét és értékvilágát, és akik ugyanúgy, ahogy mi, tisztában vannak a nyílt társadalom hálózatának, hát nevezzük irreguláris hadviselésével, azzal a soft powerrel, amelyet Soros György és a hozzá kapcsolódó baloldali NGO-k világszerte próbálnak megvalósítani. Különböző országokban, sajnos Magyarországon is elég csak a gender őrületre és a gyermekek úgynevezett LMBT érzékenyítésére gondolnunk. Úgyhogy ezért nagy öröm itt köszönteni dr. Shea-t Magyarországon, és üdvözölni a központ csapatában. Ronald Reagan mondta még jó sok évvel ezelőtt, hogy Amerikában a nagy dolgok az ebédlőasztalnál kezdődnek el. Mi most éppen egy ebéden vagyunk túl dr. Shea-jel és Chris Farrell-lel, úgyhogy remélem valóban nagy dolog fog születni ebből itt. Én örülök, hogy ő itt van és csatlakozott a csapatunkhoz, és nagyon jó, hát ha nem is szórakozás, de tudásszerzési lehetőséget kívánok önöknek a mai kerekasztal beszélgetés kapcsán. Köszönöm szépen!
Köszönöm szépen főigazgató úr szavait. Most Párkányi Eszter, az Alapjogokért Központ elemzője tart rövid előadást Együtt erő vagyunk címmel.
Tisztelt Dr. Shea Bradley Farrell asszony, tisztelt Chris Farrell, kedves hölgyeim és uraim! Engem ért az a megtiszteltetés, hogy a mai eseményünk vendégét, az ezután következő beszélgetés résztvevőjét, Dr. Shea Bradley Farrellt és az által vezetett Counterpoint intézetet bemutathatom önöknek. Dr. Shea Bradley Farrell külpolitikai és nemzetbiztonsági tanácsadó Washingtonban, valamint a Counterpoint Institute for Policy, Research and Education elnöke. Szakpolitikai szakértőként és stratégaként elemzéseket készít és ajánlásokat ad amerikai és külföldi tisztviselőknek a legmagasabb kormányzati szinteken. A Trump adminisztráció idején közvetlenül Mike Pompeo külügyminiszterrel és Ivanka Trump főtanácsadóval dolgozott együtt számos kérdésben, miközben a Concerned Women for America nemzetközi ügyekért felelős alelnökeként is tevékenykedett. Shea a külpolitikai és a segélyezés, a nemzetbiztonság, a nemzetközi fejlesztés, a nők szerepvállalásának erősítése és az emberi jogok szakértője. Nemzetközi fejlesztési szakemberként Dr. Shea Bradley Farrell sokat utazott a Közel-Keleten, Afrikában és Latin-Amerikában, ahol nemzetközi partnereknek nyújtott kapacitásépítési és képzési segítséget. A Tulane Egyetemen szerzett doktori és mesterfokozatot, ahol a Nemzetközi Fejlesztési Tanulmányok Program adjunktusa volt. Az általa vezetett Counterpoint intézet egy non-profit szervezet, amely küldetésének tekinti, hogy feltárja az igazságot a nemzetbiztonsági, külpolitikai és az Egyesült Államok kulturális alapjaival kapcsolatos kérdésekben, az amerikaiak felvilágosítása és a közpolitikai változások ösztönzése érdekében. Az intézet az Istentől származó, alkotmányosan garantált egyéni jogokon, valamint a nemzeti szuverenitás, a szabad piacgazdaság, a család, a vallásszabadság és az élethez való jog kulturális alapjain alapuló konzervatív politikát támogatja. Sokakban felmerülhet a kérdés, annyi nemzeti érzelmű, szuverenista, jobboldali szervezet van Európában is, miért tartjuk hát fontosnak mi az Alapjogokért Központnál, hogy partnereket keressünk az Egyesült Államokban? A válasz egyszerű. A konzervatívok a világ minden táján hasonló veszélyekkel néznek szembe. A baloldali progresszió hívei az emberi jogokat az emberek ellen fordították. A józan többséggel szemben radikális kisebbségeket helyeztek előtérbe, a hagyományos értékek felforgatását tűzték zászlójukra. A globális és európai baloldal mindent megtesz annak érdekében, hogy lerombolja társadalomunk alapjait. Semmibe veszi a keresztény társadalmi hagyományokat, igyekszik aláásni a nemzeti szuverenitást és a hazafias érzelmeket. A hagyományos nemi szerepeket támadva pedig saját magát, a családot igyekszik bomlasztani, ahogy ők mondják, dekonstruálni. Szemrebben és nélkül avatkoznak be országaink legszentebb demokratikus belügyeibe, így a választásainkba is, elég csak a guruló dollárok botrányt említenünk. A nyugati közbeszédre egyre nagyobb befolyást gyakorló liberális, neomarxista gondolkodással szemben egyfajta immunválaszként egy világszerte érzékelhető nemzeti konzervatív ébredés kezdődött. Bár a globális liberalizmus hívei azt állítják, hogy fogalmilag kizárt a konzervatív erők nemzetközi együttműködése, mi mégis be tudjuk bizonyítani, hogy tévednek. Mi nem nemzetek felettiségben, hanem a nemzeti erők közötti kooperációban gondolkodunk, mi ebben hiszünk. Magyarország nagyon sokat tett az elmúlt időszakban a nemzetközi jobboldal együttműködéséért. Mi magunk is igyekszünk kivenni a részünket a konzervatív reneszánsz beteljesítéséből. Ahogyan Miklós már említette, az Alapjogokért Központ szervezésében tavaly először tartották meg Európában a legnagyobb konzervatív dzsemborit, a konzervatív politikai akciók konferenciát, amelyet idén ismét megrendezhetünk Budapesten. Fontosnak tartjuk, hogy a woke ideológia által megfertőzött, magából kifordult nyugati világ visszatérjen a józanész talajára. Együtt erő vagyunk, ezt választottuk az idei konferencia mottójának. Ez a magyar jobboldal sikerét garantáló vezérelv, és ennek megfelelően idén is mindent megteszünk annak érdekében, hogy kivegyünk a magunk részét a nemzeti erők minél szélesebb körű nemzetközi összefogásának megteremtéséből is. Túlzás nélkül állítható, hogy Magyarország ma a konzervatív gondolkodás reneszánszának központja. A nemzetközi konzervatív tábor ezért példaként tekint a magyar jobboldalra, ugyanis hazánk megmutatta, hogy lehetséges több egymást követő cikluson keresztül, óriási legitimációval, az Isten-haza család 3-as értékegység mentén sikeresen vezetni egy országot. Bár a magyar nyelv véleményem szerint legszebb a világon, ma van az anyanyelv napja, így a magyar anyanyelvet is ünnepeljük, de hát azt mégiscsak el kell ismernünk, hogy kevesen értik rajtunk kívül. Ezért mindent meg kell tennünk, hogy megértessük magunkat, a céljainkat és érdekeinket közvetíteni tudjuk a nemzetközi konzervatív közösség felé, hiszen ők is csak így tudnak kiállni mellettünk. A tavalyi CPAC Hungary Orbán Viktor miniszterelnök úr főszónokként elmondott beszédében megfogalmazta a konzervatív sikerrecept 12 pontját, többek között azt is, hogy a saját szabályaink szerint kell játszanunk, barátokat kell keresnünk, és közösséget kell építenünk. Az idén is megrendezésre kerülő CPAC konferencia, valamint a maihoz hasonló rendezvények és együttműködések éppen erre adnak lehetőséget. Az alkalommal pedig élni kell, hiszen hiába vagyunk itt Közép-Európában egyedül is igazán erősek, mint konzervatív bástya, ahogy a mondás tartja, egy fecske nem csinál tavaszt. Kellenek jó szövetségesek. Tekintve, hogy Magyarország 1000 éve a nyugati civilizációhoz tartozik, hazánk érdekeit leghatékonyabban a transatlanti szövetségi rendszer részeként tudjuk érvényesíteni. Ezért is különösen fontos számunkra, hogy jó kapcsolatot ápolunk amerikai barátainkkal. Fontos, hogy legyenek barátaink, szövetségeseink a nagyvilágban, hiszen a nemzetközi baloldal folyamatos támadásainak vagyunk kitéve. Ezért is nagy öröm számunkra, hogy Shea elfogadta a meghívásunkat, és ma itt van velünk. A legalapvetőbb erkölcsi, etikai normák viszonylagossá tétele, a nemzeti döntéshozatal nemzetközi szintre való kiszervezésének kísérletei, kulturális identitásunk és értékeink relativizálása, a hagyományos családmodell dekonstruálása. Ezekkel a problémákkal a konzervatívok mindenhol szembesülnek. Ez pedig közelebb hoz és összekovácsol minket. Egyetlen választásunk maradt tehát, együtt kell fegyvert ragadnunk a globalista progresszív baloldaliak támadásaival szemben. Egymás felé kell fordulnunk, és vállat válnak vetve állni a sarat a szellemi csatákban. Nekünk, konzervatívoknak össze kell gyűlnünk, közösen kell stratégiát alkotnunk, levonni a tanulságokat győzelmekből és verességekből, valamint megvitatni a mindannyiunkat érintő ügyeket, hogy tanulhassunk egymástól. Bízom benne, hogy a most következő beszélgetésből mind tanulhatunk, és hogy Shea is azzal az érzéssel utazik majd vissza az Egyesült Államokba, hogy új tapasztalatokra és információkra tett szert magyarországi tartózkodása során. Köszönöm szépen a figyelmet, most pedig kérem tekintsenek meg egy rövid videót, amit a tavalyi CPAC-en készítettünk Shea-vel.
I think that Americans hearing about CPAC in Hungary, when I'm tweeting it out, are surprised, but they're also excited about it. They had no idea that there are also conservative values held so firmly by other countries in the world. And obviously in our country, Prime Minister Orbán, who I am a fan of, gets bad press in our country, and people need to know that it's not true. It's propaganda, and they need to know what the truth is in America and all around the world. People that believe the same conservative ideals in national sovereignty, freedom, family, children, I don't get discouraged. Keep fighting. Keep saying what you think. Do it with a heart of love and compassion, but say exactly what the truth is.
Köszönjük szépen, Eszter, és köszönjük szépen a videót is. Most beszélgetés következik. Shea Bradley Farrellt Koskovics Zoltán, az Alapjogokért Központ geopolitikai elemzője fogja kérdezni. A beszélgetés nyelve angol lesz, szinkrontolmácsolás igény szerint biztosított.
So, in the immortal words of the Twitter founder, is this thing on? And now it is. It's so great to welcome you back to Budapest again, Dr. Shea.
Here we are again.
Yeah, again. And you have to know that I was moderating Shea's roundtable at CPAC Hungary last time around, so we are sort of a practiced pair. Okay, so let's start with you and with Counterpoint. What motivates you when you fight our shared fight?
Well, we do not have a lot of conservative think tanks in America. We are quite outnumbered. I am motivated by so many things, some of which I mentioned here. Our faith in God, our belief in the family, all of these things are being attacked. Our patriotism for our own home country are being attacked. These are traditional values that I grew up with. My father actually was in the military in the United States, an officer, a pilot, and we grew up in a very patriotic family, living in other places around the world, but always standing for America first, as I believe your Prime Minister also says, we are hungry first. It makes sense. This is sense. Over the past 10 years especially, these traditional values are being attacked. I came to Washington, D.C. about 7 years ago to work in international development. I traveled around the world helping less developed countries grow economically, businesses, this kind of thing. And I went to D.C. to work in this. But where I worked in the middle of D.C. was about 2 blocks from the Human Rights Campaign or the Human Rights Watch. I'm sure you're familiar with this NGO.
Yes, a well-known organization.
It's
in
well
Hungary.
known
They
in
love us.
Hungary. And the people that stood outside the building there were part of my my thinking changing on where I needed to be in my life, because they were trying to tell me what I should believe about family. And I realized in that political environment in DC that I was losing my freedom. And I didn't know this, living in America, in middle America, away from politics. As I tell my husband, if they had left me alone, they would not be fighting me now, but they made me mad. So now they have a force to reckon with. And that was really the impetus.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your questions?
Yes, it did. And we have a great ally in you, so I guess we should thank the Libs for one more thing. I think we all know that DC probably has the highest concentration of think tanks and research institutes per square mile in the universe. How difficult is it to swim against the current, so to speak?
It is very difficult, but I would like to say that one of the things that encourages me is our relationship with the Center for Fundamental Rights, with the relationship with the Orban government, with talking to people here in Hungary. This is my 3rd trip to Hungary. I was here speaking at CPAC last year. We spent about 9 days here, my husband and I. Before that, I came to the Budapest Demographic Summit 2019, and I spoke on behalf of the family there. It is an encouragement for me to know that there are other people that very cheerfully stand for the things they believe in. And that's something my husband and I are very impressed with Hungarian people that we meet, as well as the government. We call you cheerful warriors because you stand for what you believe very firmly, but you do it very kindly and very cheerfully. And you don't have to get in a fight about it. Whereas in America right now, we're having trouble discussing issues that we don't agree on because people are very fast to get angry and to hurl names. I'm sure you know nothing about this, but to be called a fascist, to be called a LGBT hater, a homophobe, you know nothing about that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Authoritarian.
I've never heard of that.
So, without knowing the facts.
Do you know the European Parliament by any chance, Nate?
I've heard of them, yes.
Okay, wonderful. And it's really great to have you in this fight with us, especially since you've decided to write a book about Hungary for Americans. I think that's a fantastic idea. We seem to be getting more and more popular, at least in conservative America, in the red states. So there's going to be a market for it, hopefully. But what inspired you to write this book? What gave you the idea to start on this, probably not a short project?
Well, I think it starts back in my childhood and believing very much in nationalism and national sovereignty, national identity. And really, CPAC Hungary, I had the idea in my head before about writing a book like this, but CPAC Hungary, with the 12 points of the Prime Minister, almost every, well, in some way you can connect every point to national sovereignty, but this was more impetus, encouragement for me to think about how to talk about Hungary's national sovereignty in the EU context, because that's the reality of it. Hungary needs the EU needs Hungary. And I believe that you can talk extensively about why Hungary maintaining their sovereignty is good for the European Union. And this should be told to the European Union as a way to argue for their own good.
So where do you start a book project like that? How far back in history do you think you should go?
Well, that's what I've been thinking about. I'm going to start at least 1,000 years back, because I know over the past 1,000 years, Hungary has been conquered and gained freedom, and been conquered and gained freedom. And I think that's very important, because I think that has a lot to do with the way that you view life and the steadfast holding that you have on your sovereignty. And the last trip we were here, we went to the House of Terror, and I knew that Hungary had been occupied by the Soviet Union, but I didn't understand the extent of it. And if you have something like that in your recent memory, then certainly you hold more steadfastly, digging your heels in to hold on to your own culture, your own autonomy, your own identity. And I see in America a difference between 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I grew up with a love of freedom, an understanding of, as Reagan said, we can lose our freedom in one generation. And I think in America we need to have that revised in us, come up again in us. So I know that I keep getting off the subject, but it's because I'm very passionate.
No, I think it's quite our subject. Yes, there's a kinship between Hungarians and Americans in the sense that we know and appreciate freedom, and we know the price for freedom.
I agree. I think there's very strong similarities between our independence, 1776, a fight for freedom, and your revolution in 1956, and then the release, the Soviets leaving. I think that there is an understanding of the importance of freedom, and that, as we say, freedom isn't free.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's what Reagan told us as well. He's, by the way, one of the most quoted politicians in Hungary, probably the second after Viktor Orban. Okay, thank you, Esti, for introducing Shea to our audience. We know that you have a wealth of experience and expertise. What is it that you are going to draw upon as you write this book?
Well, it's probably different than other researchers who may come to Central Europe. I am looking at the history, as we talked about. I want to look at historical data. I want to look at statistics of Hungary currently and years before, economic statistics, family statistics, policies, these things. But the type of research I do is ethnographic. It brings the people into the research, and that's why I am conducting interviews as well while I'm here. I'll be back in a couple months to do more interviews, because when you talk to people to find out what they really think about these issues, you find themes in there that you can't find in records, you can't find in data or statistics. So I'm actually looking forward to what might come out of that. Maybe things that you talk about, but it hasn't been brought together in a narrative yet, a way to present it to the West or to the Hungarians, even to other people. Am I speaking too much like an academic person at the moment?
That makes sense to me, and I think to us Hungarians as well. But it's a novel experience that an American comes here to Hungary to actually listen to what we're saying. So that's new. That's not what we have been used to in the last 20 years, maybe. But that's excellent, and I hope it becomes popular and Americans get a much clearer picture of Hungary and what we stand for. And
I hope so. Can I say one thing about that, Zoltan? One thing I'd like for you to understand is that, like Miklos said in the beginning, there are many conservatives in the United States. If you look at polls, at least half of us. Perhaps if you just make people right in the center right, maybe even 80%. But what you see is our media. What you see is our current administration. And they do not reflect the feelings and the values of most Americans. But the media is extremely strong. The liberal left is extremely strong right now, especially with the administration. On the other hand, what Americans are seeing about Hungary is what the media is telling them, the mainstream media mostly. And even people who are conservative sometimes think, oh, well, Hungary is an authoritarian state. And I try to explain, and they're like, oh, really, you've been there? And they have a parliamentary system. Oh, their prime minister has been elected again for the fourth. Oh, you mean you weren't afraid when? So I say to them, what does the media say about you as conservatives? We're called authoritarian now. We're called fascists. We're called Putin lovers. We're being called all kinds of things. And so when I explain to them that you are being maligned by the media in the same way, then the light goes on. So this is something that I try to explain when I do media in the United States as well.
And thank you very much for doing that. Like Miklos said in his introductory speech, we have very strong friends in America, and we are much richer for you guys. Thank you very much. So I thought we might talk a little bit about Viktor Orban's 12 points that he delivered last CPAC. Which one do you think is probably the most important that travels the easiest across the pond, so to speak?
Oh, wow. That may be the first one, playing by your own rules, because certainly Americans know how to play by their own rules. And I liked what he said about that back in CPAC, and I'm paraphrasing because it was a year ago now. But it was just, what struck in my heart was an understanding of your beliefs are important. And I'm not really thinking of the right word, but not to be afraid of what you believe and doing it the way that you were taught in the light of opposition. So I think Americans, that really resonates with Americans. The 2 points that probably stick with me might not be what you would expect, but I love the one, read every day or 1 day a week, because I had also made that goal or promise to myself that 1 day out of the week I would stop all I got to tweet, I got to do media, I got to write a policy paper, I got to do this. I would read so that I could, many different things, not just current things, but history and Roger Scruton, which I learned about more about when I was here the last time. And that's something that really feeds you. We have to feed ourselves. And then the other one that resonates with me is about, your faith. I forget exactly what it is, but holding to your faith.
Yeah. If, as a politician, as a leader, you understand that at the end of your life you will be called to account, that influences the way that you approach your job as a leader. Very recently, Prime Minister Orban had his State of the Nation speech. It is the most important political speech in Hungary. Obviously, it's not translated by, it's not carried by CNN. We don't expect that. But Viktor Orban's main theme during this speech was peace and security. And that is two things that we are very much lacking. What are your thoughts on that subject, especially in light of Mr. Biden's recent visit to Kiev?
I have a very unpopular view of the war in Ukraine in the United States. I am more welcome here, in my view, than anywhere in the United States. I will start by saying that I believe in Ukrainian sovereignty. However, I do not believe that it is in U.S. interest to do what we're doing. I believe we are enabling a war that has weakened Europe because of the energy crisis, has driven Putin into the hands of China, which is really where the United States should be focusing on bringing down China's infiltration of the United States. I believe that it's also enabling a war that will grind on. If you look at the way Russia has acted historically, like in Chechnya, I don't believe that Russia will stop in Ukraine. I believe that we are enabling a war that is killing many more Ukrainians. That must happen. And the United States has really increased the lethality of the weapons that we are sending. It's very stupid, I believe, because we can start a much broader conflict that perhaps for us is more of an idea than it is for Hungary, who is next door to where a broader conflict could start, perhaps nuclear conflict. I am also tired of the money that we are sending. Again, I believe in Ukrainian sovereignty, and I do not believe that Russia should have invaded Ukraine. I also believe that he was enabled by the weakness of our government right now. He did not threaten such during the Trump administration, but during the Obama administration, he took over Crimea. So I just give that as examples. And last thing I'll say, Zoltan, is we are sending $110 billion. We are in more debt than we have ever been in our lives, mostly to the Chinese. We have a national security emergency at our border, which has been caused by the policies of the Biden administration. And Chris and I spend time down there on the border where the immigrants are coming over. So I don't say this as just someone who is sitting in Washington, D.C. I've been down there, and not only is it a security emergency for the United States, I have watched the illegal immigrants coming. The number of illegal immigrants that are dying is a record high because they collaborate with Mexican cartels to come across and who have no regard for their life. It's just a very bad situation, yet Trump could not get Congress to give him $5 billion for us to build a wall there. But in our weakened state, quite frankly, economically, we are finding $110 billion to send over, also giving military weapons that we are in need of at the moment.
I can understand that. Building the Hungarian border fence wasn't very popular with Brussels either, so we can sympathize with that. My final question before we open up the floor for questions from the audience concerns another hot topic which was in the State of the Nation's address by Viktor Orban, and this is child protection. Unfortunately, we have just had an outrageous event. An educator was involved in a pedophilic scandal, which brings us to one of the major problems that I think all Western societies face, is how do we protect our children from what is popularly called groomers in the United States, I believe, or those people who want to exert sexualized influence on them.
Well, I think Hungary is doing a good job of that because you have said no to the EU putting curriculum in here. And I hope that you will also continue to say no if our government, USAID, tries to put these sorts of programs into Hungary, the LGBT ideology programs. I always differentiate because all people deserve human rights, fundamental human rights. I try to explain that. I think in America, our parents have stood up to say no, and the parents have done a good job. People ask me, what has the Republican Party done? And I say, not a lot, but the parents are standing up for the children. Of course, Ron DeSantis has done a good job. There are other states that are passing laws right now to protect children. fundamentally what is wrong. Why are we in this crazy position? This is my personal belief. I don't push this on anybody, but I believe in America especially, we have gotten away from God, from our religion, our faith, that gives you a moral balance. Because right now we're saying that morality is relative, and this idea has grown and grown and grown, and you see as the lines of morality are being blurred out, the lines between male and female are being blurred out. There's a lot of trying to homogenize distinctions. At the same time, the narrative of inclusive and diverse is being spoken, which is not true. It's silly. It's not that. It's not true. Does that make sense, Zoltan?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Yes, you, sir, in the middle.
Thanks very much. Dr. Shea.
We can hear you.
Oh, we can hear you.
Great. Dr. Shea, we've heard a bit. Never mind. A bit of your book. We've heard that you would like to digest statistics and history of Hungary, but what exactly are the topics, the main focuses, and when can we expect it?
Sometime at the end of the year, you can expect it. And in a broad theme, it focuses on the national identity of Hungary and why that's not only good for Hungarians, but why it's very good for the EU and it's very good for Western civilization. So with the history, I'll explain the background or the context. And with the interviews that I do and the statistics, I want to explain why it is good for the EU. So, for example, my background in international development, it's very clear that when one member state of a region, let's say, is doing well economically, that the others do well. Trade happens well, investment happens back and forth. But what are the other reasons that nationalism is so important to Europe, to the EU? I guess my thought is, instead of only explaining nationalism in terms of how important it is to Hungary, which certainly it is, and explain why, let's also explain to Western civilization why nationalism, national identity is so important. And in that context too, I want to explain what nationalism really means, because we've conflated authoritarianism with nationalism lately. And like I said, when I grew up, it meant you were patriotic. You love your country. You take care of other countries, as I know Hungary does, and the United States most certainly does. We're a huge humanitarian country. You guys, I have been so impressed with what you did in Nineveh. I met a minister, Tristan, at the time when all of that was starting. My husband and I were in the Ukrainian refugee center in May of last year. What a wonderful, elaborate process of helping the refugees you have put up. So I want to explain what real nationalism is. You put your country first, you hold on to your culture, your identity, and you take care of others. But when you're making policy decisions, for example, going back to Ukraine, I just do not believe, as far as we have taken it, is in national interest. And sir, I got off the topic, but does that answer your question? Okay.
Anybody else? Yes, sir, please.
Do you think that a conservative administration in the US in the future could change the current situation in Ukraine, maybe take a step closer to the peace?
Yes, I do. I very much hope that happens. I hope that you will pray with us that happens, because we're in a dangerous situation for our country and I believe for Europe with our current administration. And I don't take joy in speaking against my own government, my own country, but it's my duty to say what the truth is. So the bad part of that is we have a good bit of time before that could happen. But yes, I do. I believe that it would be a more pragmatic approach, more of a deterrence approach, which obviously the Trump administration implied deterrence and directly said, we will do XYZ if you do this to some bad actors. We can talk about Iran, Korea, many different countries. So I do believe that. So let's pray, please.
Shea, how difficult is it to get across the Hungarian position regarding the conflict, namely getting peace as fast as possible? That's the Hungarian position. How difficult is it to get across in DC?
It's extremely difficult because it's not only the Hungarian position, it is the position of the Counterpoint Institute. And it is even difficult in conservative circles. Although I do see that changing. People are wearying. People are starting to talk a little bit differently. I'm trying to get the word out. I'll give you an example. Counterpoint Institute has an open letter. It's a letter that asks for the United States to call for immediate ceasefire in Ukraine and to negotiate peace. I have the ability to take this letter to some of the highest levels of conservative leadership in DC. And because it is such a divide, we are so divided on it, I have 8 signatures, but that's not enough to publish it. I do believe these signatures are very high level, they're very influential, but I still need more, and I'm not going to give up. I believe, these letters sometimes, they're just letters, but you publicize them and then you spread them all over the media, and it at least can maybe change the narrative of it. But Zoltan, you and I are Twitter pals, right?
Full disclosure.
The people that retweet all of my things about the border and Hungary or whatever it is Counterpoint Institute is working on will not retweet about my saying we must negotiate peace in Ukraine. We must stop sending tanks and all of this. So that and, of course, a lot of hate speech and all about it. But I have an article that I wrote that came out in the Washington Times, I believe it was last September. It's called Time to Negotiate Peace for Ukraine. It's in the Washington Times, and I refer to it because it is Counterpoint Institute stance. It's what we've talked about as far as weakening Europe, pushing China and Russia together into stronger alliances, and even though it was written in September, it still stands. There's nothing different about it.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. And once again, Dr. Shea, thank you for coming to Hungary. Thank you for your support for Hungary. And thank you for your friendship.
Zoltan and Miklos and Dora, everyone, may I say what an honor it is to be a senior fellow for Center for Fundamental Rights. And your friendship, your alliance with Counterpoint Institute, with the Americans, it's not only a professional alliance, it is a friendship, and it's very encouraging to us. And as Miklos always says, united we stand. So thank you very much. I look forward to this year.